Welcome back. So, for some, the very idea of Jews in the future who are Christ followers worshiping with sacrifice is, as one puts it, quite abhorrent. And the reason they argue it's so abhorrent is the assumption that these sacrifices Ezekiel sees being offered in the future, and I quote, must be expiatory in exactly the same way as the sacrifices in Leviticus were expiatory. So, a comment about Torah and sacrifice, and then a comment about Hebrews. I put it to you that the First Testament's expectation of a future righteous reign by the victorious Messiah is not based on Sinai, but is based on the promise covenant God already made to Abe and reiterated and expanded to Dave. Remember what Isaiah and Jeremiah, along with Ezekiel, call it. The everlasting covenant. So, Hebrews. Writing to Hebrew Christians who were under severe persecution and at risk of slacking off in their pursuit of righteousness and allowing unbelief to creep in and lapsing into externalism and legalism, the writer of Hebrews addresses the question, is Christianity the real thing? The writer of Hebrews says that he wants to recharge their waning spirit and to infuse them with courage to be strong in faith. Now, Hebrews 9:26 states that Christ the Messiah entered once for all, demonstrating the efficacy of his one single sacrifice, which never needs to be repeated in order to atone and cancel the sin question forever for those who believe. I mean, if it were any other way, that if Christ would have had to appear before God often for sin, then it would have been necessary for Christ to suffer often. Not just since Calvary, but since the foundation of the world. But no, the writer of Hebrews argues, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son. And all that happened before that at the tabernacle and then at the temple served as object lessons. I mean, tangible pointers to this once-for-all event. So, the sacrifices of Leviticus were merely provisional. They were symbolic. They were typical. But Christ's single act in history set aside the sin question forever. His work was definite, complete, nothing left to be added. Now, it can't be denied that the writer of Hebrews comes to the conclusion that the sacrifices were cosmicon, as he puts it, worldly, not efficacious in their own right. But with that, the law and the prophets agree. At Calvary, the Messiah effected the paramount sacrifice toward which all the others pointed forward, and to which our reenactment with the bread and the cup point backward. So, this is no new doctrine. The writer of Hebrews is expounding on the doctrine that had been developing throughout the First Testament. The blood sacrifices of the First Testament were to the sacrifice of Christ what a certified check is to the actual payment of a specified amount in cash. So, I'm selling my car and I don't want to take a personal check from the buyer, so I insist on their bringing a certified check. So what's the value of that piece of paper? The value of that piece of paper, that certified check, depends entirely on an event. Namely, the buyer has deposited that amount in the bank. That's what the bank is certifying. So, backed by real money in the bank, I can take that certified check to my bank and it's honored as if it were cash. Well, without the ultimate sacrifice for sin, the rituals taught in the First Testament would be as empty and meaningless as a check drawn on insufficient funds. See, the sacrifice of Christ is obviously superior because it's the actual, eternal, all-sufficient payment toward which David's checks were drawn in faith. It doesn't make any difference when, chronologically, the believer expresses his or her faith in the actual event. For David, it was prospective. For you and me, it's retrospective. The writer of Hebrews agrees with Jeremiah that the covenant renewal that God begins at the cross and resurrection will culminate in the second advent, that great and awesome day of the Lord. So, if Ezekiel's not just blowing bubbles, and there will be a temple with worship taking place, and both the temple and the worship is distinct from Mosaic worship, and the tabernacle and temple, yet similar in their symbolic significance, there seems to be no insurmountable problem to their being instituted in a millennial kingdom in commemoration of the one great all-sufficient atonement that was effected by Christ on Calvary. See, as surely as the old sacrifices were symbolic, so Ezekiel expects his to be. But since Calvary and Resurrection Day have taken place, and the victorious king is on the throne, the meaning of Ezekiel's sacrifice will have developed far beyond any rite practiced in the First Testament. You should check out Dan Block's masterful 2-volume commentary on Ezekiel in the Nikot series, and I think you'd enjoy his Jewish Christian dialogical commentary with Jacob Milgram on Ezekiel 38 to 48. Remember, he's the Jewish scholar we consulted on the Levitical purity laws. I wish we had more time to spend on each of these books, but I pray you'll keep on digging into God's Word for your sake, for the sake of those to whom you'll minister, and most of all, for His glory. See you in a bit.